TCGs have been a part of my life for a very long time, and among all the games I've played, Yu-Gi-Oh! Stands out as one of the largest influences in my life. I've been there for about every new summoning mechanic that Konami kept shoving into this undying husk. While I'm not as hyper-fixated on the game as I used to be, I still like to keep up with it from time to time. As much of a drug as nostalgia is, I have to admit that Konami's continual attempts at it have been nothing but tiresome. They have, however, found some success with Duel Links. Speed duels, on the other hand, let's just say you're only ever finding players online. It was pretty clear that the company was looking for a fresh new audience to enjoy their game, but with the barrier to entry, it was getting more and more difficult to do so. Something needed to change. The game needed to reinvent itself. It was just after the release of Eternity Code, the last core booster set in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains era. The game was soon about to be rid of the horrifying plague known as Master Rule 4. And here we were all ready for the next generation of the TCG. What possible new additions to the game could they add? What about the next Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime? The possibilities were endless. I think it's safe to say that no one, and I mean no one, could have predicted that this was what we were getting. Not only was the main game not getting a new mechanic, the next anime wasn't even utilizing Master Rule 5. Instead, what we got was an entirely new format with its own brand of cards. Despite the mixed reception, the game still lives on today along with a sequel series to the original 7th anime. It's safe to say that Rush Duels won't be going anywhere anytime soon. So what exactly is Rush Duels? Did it end up accomplishing its new goal of attracting a new audience? Is it actually fun to play? And most importantly, will it ever come out in English? Before we do any of that, I gotta explain the game. I'll try and keep it concise. There's actually quite a bit to go over, so I'll keep things simple. Every TCG has their rules on minimum deck size. Rush Duels has its size at a nice 40 cards minimum and 60 cards maximum. Be sure to take real good care of your deck. Remember, it's not about how big it is, but how you use it. Now that you know proper deck care, let's talk about what goes inside of one. The meat and potatoes of Rush Duel cards are split into 3 types: Monster, Spell, and Trap. If you've played Yu-Gi-Oh!, you know exactly what you're getting into. You can only run 3 copies per particular card. Easy. As a rule of thumb for beginners, it's usually the case where running more monsters than spell and traps can be pretty optimal. As of the making of this video, monsters and spells also have their own subcategories. First up are normal monsters. These guys are generally meant to have decent stats while having no effects. You'd think these would be neglected, but several strategies actually revolve around them. In fact, normal monsters were once meta, but that's a story for another time. Next up are effect monsters. Their background is orange, and it's pretty self-explanatory what they do, so I'll spare myself from insulting your intelligence. To use an effect, you need to be able to pay the card's requirement. But there is one important distinction from base Yu-Gi-Oh! All effects are soft once per turn. What does this mean? It means that you can use the same effect on different copies of a card at a time. If you summon Mystic Dealer and use its effect, then you summon another, you can also use that Mystic Dealer's effect as well. Another important tidbit is that monsters being flicked face down also resets the once per turn effect clause. However, this won't usually come up very often. Then we have fusion monsters sporting a purple background. Much like the main game, Fusions work the same way here, but with a bit of a difference. When activating the fusion spell, you need to have the monsters listed on the field, with the exception of a few cards. All fusions require specific names, and are generally much stronger than regular tribute monsters, for the most part. Some of these fusions include unique types original to the game, along with multi-choice effects. With these, you just need to pick one of two options. Now last, and certainly not least, maximum monsters. Rush Duel's original summoning mechanic. Maximums are unique in that it's made up of 3 monsters that take up the entire field as one entire monster. Listed on each card is the name along with whether or not it's the left or right. On the center card lists the monster's maximum attack, which is the attack used when maximum summoned. In order to actually do this, you'll need to summon all 3 pieces onto the field at the same time. All monsters you had on the field prior are sent to the graveyard. These monsters boast huge amounts of attack, along with 3 separate effects from each single piece. Most maximum monsters can only activate these effects while in maximum mode. However, recent cards, upon the making of this video, also have effects that can be used outside of it, with enhancements if they are in said mode. If you're the type who enjoys huge bigly boss monsters, then maximums might be for you. Spell cards in Rush Duels can be activated immediately from either hand or set during your turn. They also follow the same soft once per turn clause as monster effects. Much of the same for monsters can also be applied here, difference being that normal spells are sent to the graveyard upon activation. Equip spells can be equipped to a monster while staying face up on the field. They generally give a nice little boost, with a few being much more restrictive, in return for much stronger effects. You can equip as many as you want onto a single monster, including the same one. Following our last subcategory, field spells are cards you put in a designated field zone. While face up on the field, they'll grant you effects such as attack boosts and protection. Both players can have a field spell active at a time. If you can't activate a field spell due to requirement, but don't want it in your hand, you can always set it instead. And lastly, we have traps. These have purple backgrounds, and you have to set them for a turn first before activating them. They generally have requirements that activate during the opponent's turn. And I think that should about cover it. Another original mechanic to the game are legend cards. These have the legend icon on them, and you can only have one copy of a given card. In current Rush Duel rules, you can have 1 legend card for each of the 3 types in the deck at a time. That's 3 powerful cards to select from. These cards are well known from the original game, such as Blue Eyes White Dragon, Graceful Charity, and Mirror Force. So instead of telling me what Pot of Greed does for the millionth time, just play it already. Some decks even center around legend cards. Any beginner trying to build a deck can be an arduous task. Luckily, I've got deck builds to recommend you in the description below. Going off of that, you'll probably want to know where you can play this. I heavily recommend the following platforms, EDO Pro and Yu-Gi-Oh! Omega. They're both supporting the Rush Duels format as well as being up to date with cards. Being automated also helps the process. Now that we've got that covered, it's time to learn how to actually play the game. First, both you and your opponent draw 4 cards to start after shuffling your decks. First turn players can actually draw, unlike in Master Duel. Life is at 8,000 and whoever gets it to 0 wins the duel. Additionally, if you cannot draw any more cards due to having no deck, you also lose the duel. This is what the field looks like for a typical Rush Duel. Much like Duel Links and Speed Duels, you have 3 monster and spell and trap zones. Everything else should be captioned for your viewing pleasure. Now it's time to go over the phases. First, it's the draw phase. And unlike the regular game, in Rush Duels you'll always be drawing until your hand has about 5 cards. If you already have 5 cards, then you just draw 1 extra. This allows for intense back and forth, which is one of the biggest draws for players when wanting to pick it up, no pun intended. From there, you'll head right into the main phase. This is where you'll either summon monsters and/or set or activate spells or traps. Unlike the regular game, you're granted unlimited normal summons. To any Yu-Gi boomer out there watching, it's not really that big of a deal. You can only summon up to 3 monsters, with an average of 1 to 2 tributes being active on the board. Not to mention your opponent is as likely to have a similar board state. Again, the draw to 5 rule makes it so that both sides are always finding a way to play each turn. When you're done with that, you head right into the battle phase, but you'll skip this if it's the first turn. In the battle phase, you can have any of your attack position monsters declare attack. If they attack monsters, they'll compare their attack and defense values based on their position, and whoever has the highest value wins. If it's the same, then they both get destroyed. However, nothing happens if the opposing monster is in defense. From there, life is subtracted for you or your opponent depending on the attack and defense difference. Direct attacks take full damage. You can also do nothing if you really don't feel inclined to attack. From there, you can end your turn. During the end phase, effects that last until end of turn are now gone. From there, it's your opponent's turn. Now that you know how the game works, you can get out there and start rush dueling. Now, what do I think of the game? I love rush duels. I think it's a great way to experience older Yu-Gi-Oh! Without it being extremely slow and methodical. And while I'm sure there's tons of Go format appreciators, it's really not my cup of tea. The game has become a lot more diverse and varied compared to when it first started, but that should be a given with any card game. There's tons and tons of decks to choose from, with a lot of generic decks to play. Side decking is allowed for competitive play, and yes, there are competitive tournaments. Now, in reference to Mastered Rule 5 Yu-Gi-Oh!, I think it's important to understand that this format isn't for everyone. There's plenty of reasons to enjoy the modern-based game, but for this format in particular, I find that long-term strategizing does go a long way. Since back and forth are very likely, you might be inclined to save key cards in your hand instead of sending them face down. The possibility of backer destruction is quite real, and with the draw to 5 rule, you aren't losing out on much. However, I believe that this format's biggest strength lies in its simplicity. Many of Yu-Gi-Oh's rulings that an average player wouldn't know are virtually non-existent here. Despite having a more basic gameplay loop, Rush Duels offers a wide degree of mastery over deck building and play, so once you really start enjoying the game, you can enter into the deck building rabbit hole. There's so many ways to play, and it's only going to expand with every new set. So, did Rush Duels succeed in finding a new audience? Yes it did. And it's quite plain to see too. Konami has its own form of tournaments known as the Galaxy Cup. Unlike Master Duel, this one does have age divisions. Plenty of school kids are already in the competitive scene with meta-level decks. While I was their age, I was building shitty caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. Unlike Speed Duels, this game is actually being played IRL. Sure, there's a bit of power creeping here and there, but what game doesn't have power creep? It's just an inevitable process that I'd love to talk about in the future. I do hope that you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it satiated your attention span long enough for you to multi-tap out. Are you interested in Rush Duels now? If you're already playing, what's your favorite deck? How did you get into the game? What's your best Rush Duel story? Type it down in the comments below. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so that the YouTube algorithm rewards me. More videos like this are gonna be coming out weekly, so hit that notification bell as well. Thank you, and I hope you all have a fantastic week.